I made a short presentation covering a computer graphics trick I use called a depth prepass. Now, if you don't know a lot about computer graphics, or if you don't know about depth tests, don't worry, I will break it all down as we go. So first of all, imagine that you're a painter, and you paint this nice background here. Pretty cool, huh? And we want to add some subjects. So we add a couple spheres. Nice. Now, the problem is that we painted over part of our background, and that's kind of annoying. We wasted time painting this background and also worrying about the lighting for that background as well. But it's not a big deal. I mean, it was a pretty simple background anyways, so maybe we can live with that. But then we want to paint a few more spheres. Well, I think you see the problem here. Our red sphere just completely covered up our green sphere. We really don't like that because we spent all that time worrying about lighting and shading for our green sphere, and then it just totally goes to waste because it's completely covered by our red sphere. And not only that, we also wasted time painting large sections of the shading and parts of the orange sphere that get covered up by the pink sphere. So we don't really like that either. This problem in computer graphics is known as overdraw, and it can be a major drain on your performance. The thing is, as a painter, you don't know exactly where these spheres are in 3D space. It's just a 2D painting, but with 3D computer graphics, we know exactly where they are. So we can use something known as a depth buffer and a depth test. Now at first, we have a depth buffer that has a value for every pixel on the screen, but we don't know exactly what that value should be yet, so we initialize it to something really large to represent just somewhere out in space. And then we want to figure out what color this particular pixel should be, the one represented by this ray in the photo here. So first of all, we draw a red sphere. And then for this particular pixel, we can tell that the sphere and the particular pixel is 1.2 meters away. So we add that value to the depth buffer for this spot, 1.2. But then we want to draw our green sphere. And we find out that that exact same pixel, if it were to be green, it would be 3.1 meters away. But we already know that the pixel that's already there is 1.2 meters away, so we don't draw it at all, and we can totally skip all of those expensive lighting and shading calculations and avoid overdraw. I think you can see the problem here, though, which is we have to draw the red sphere first. If we draw the green sphere first, well, then the red pixel is just going to cover up the green pixel because we don't know yet in the depth buffer that there's going to be something 1.2 meters away. So I made a quick demo to showcase overdraw with depth testing. So we just have a simple solar system model that spins around. And you notice that it's mostly gray. The gray color represents how much overdraw there is. So a darker gray color would mean we only drew to that pixel once, and a lighter gray means we're drawing to it multiple times. So you'll notice that there's a lot of overdraw without any depth testing. Planets overlap each other and we're drawing all of them, of course, because we don't have a depth test. That's to be expected. So then we turn on the depth test, and we do it as we typically do. And you notice it's a lot better already. When planets pass behind the sun, they don't add overdraw at all. But when planets pass in front of the sun, like Mercury here, you see it gets drawn, those pixels get drawn to twice. Once again, this is because of the order that we're drawing these in. We're drawing the sun first, so we don't know which pixels are going to get covered up by Mercury in the future. We can't take that information and go back in time to when we were drawing the sun. But what if we could know how far away these pixels are from the camera before we even touch paint to canvas? This is the concept of a depth pre-pass. We first run a pass that just fills the depth buffer. We just figure out where all the geometry is and how far away the pixels are from the camera. We don't actually draw any pixels to the screen. Then we know where the geometry will be in the future. So then when we draw our scene from what we saw earlier, when we draw our orange sphere and, well, where our green sphere would have been, we don't actually draw those pixels at all because they're getting filtered out by our depth test. And then, when we draw the remaining shapes, they just slot right in. For actually implementing the depth pre-pass, I switched to a more complex scene. And at first, I ran it with typical depth testing and ran my overdraw visualizer on it. So once again, areas that light up a lighter shade of gray or white have a lot of overdraw. I notice there's a lot of overdraw. Of course, the depth test is filtering out a good portion of it. Like you'll notice when the leaves go behind the pillars, they're not getting drawn behind those pillars. So likely the leaves are getting drawn after the pillars. So at least there's that, but we definitely could improve. So then I ran it with the depth pre-pass. And you notice there's pretty much no overdraw. The only areas that have overdraw, you'll notice pretty soon there's a couple areas that just light up white. Those are actually windows because there's transparency there. Of course, when we have transparent objects, our depth test does not work at all because we don't want to filter out objects that are behind transparent objects. That doesn't make any sense. So I have an example here of kind of what it would look like if our spheres were semi-transparent and we wanted the colors to blend together rather than having spheres blocking other spheres. But another example you could think of is having a tree behind a stained glass window. Now it wouldn't make a lot of sense for the depth test to throw out all the tree pixels just because they're behind a stained glass window. We want to see both. But is our depth free pass worth it in general? That can depend mostly on your per pixel shading function. If this function is very complex, it could definitely help. If it's simple, like we're doing old school PS1 style Garou shading, then we don't really care about drawing pixels twice. Also, if our geometry is very complex, a depth pre-pass could also make performance worse, because we're figuring out where the geometry is twice, once to fill the depth buffer, and again to actually draw the scene. I really enjoyed making this demo and learned a lot about depth tests and deferred rendering while making it. Techniques like this have a lot of interesting potential, and I'm excited to keep exploring them.